In August I reviewed the master edition of the EverSolo DMP A6 and was asked by a number of you to also review the standard version. And although there is a run on it, distributor ERCT was kind enough to lend me his demo. In the meantime I had decided to add the master edition to my setup too, which gave me the luxury position having both next to each other. Since I expected many viewers wanted to watch this review rather than that of the master edition, I made this a full review, including chapters where to use and in use. If you have watched the review of the master edition already, you can easily skip these by clicking in the timeline. To keep things simple, from here on I will call the standard DMP A6 the standard version and the master edition DMP A6 the master edition. When functions or properties are equal on both versions, I will use EverSolo. This because the standard version is functionally identical to the master edition. Time to see where it is to be used in your stereo. It needs to be connected to your router in the network over either a network cable or Wi-Fi. This way you can play music from internet radio stations and streaming services like Tidal, Qobuz, Amazon Music, Spotify Music and the like. If a computer or NAS is connected to the network too and holds music, that music can be played too. The analog outputs of the EverSolo will normally be connected to an amplifier over either RCA or XLR cables. The amplifier in turn is connected to a pair of loudspeakers. The EverSolo can be operated from the touchscreen on the front or from a smartphone or tablet using the EverSolo app for iOS or Android. Since it can be used as a digital to analog converter and a digital preamp, you can use a power amp instead of the integrated amp, or use active loudspeakers connected directly. Volume is then controlled on the EverSolo or in the app. You can also play music from a computer directly over USB-C, connect a CD player over SPDIF or USB and a TV over Toslink. That way you can use the audio qualities of the EverSolo with these devices too. The cabinet is made of black anodized aluminium and measures 270 by 187 by 90 mm and weighs 2.5 kilos. On the front we see a large volume control that, when pressed, functions as a standby button. The 6-inch full-color LCD touchscreen shows, depending on the function you're in, the controls, the music playing or a pair of level meters. On the photo here, one of the 4 types of meters, the peak meters. The rear is far more crowded, with on the left the power switch and the IEC mains inlet, then the network connection and the HDMI audio only output. There are 2 USB sockets, one for connecting the DAC to for if you want to further upgrade, and one for a storage medium or, when changing a setting in the software, for connecting a computer so you can copy files to the EverSolo directly. Then the digital inputs for if you want to use the EverSolo as a DAC. Optical on Toslink, SPDIF on RCA and USB audio class 2 on USB-C. A USB A to B cable comes with the unit, but a USB A to C cable for this input has to be bought separately. Then the outputs, starting with the digital ones. The optical on Toslink and SPDIF on RCA. The analog outputs come as balanced on XLR connectors and single-ended on RCA. Finally, there are 2 Wi-Fi antennas and 1 Bluetooth antenna. On the bottom, an M.2 NVMe PCIe 3.0 SSD up to 4 TB can be added by opening this cover. This way your own music can be stored internally, while the EverSolo now can function as a NAS as well. Inside we will see differences between the standard version and the master edition, but a large part isn't different. We find the power supply here with the mains filter, followed by the switch mode power supply, branded EverSolo ultra low noise power supply. The middle section holds the digital electronics. It's physically separated from the power supply circuit board. This part does the digital inputs and outputs, plus the FN Link Wi-Fi module and the Qualcomm Bluetooth 5 module that supports SBC, AAC, aptX, aptXLL, aptX HD and LDAC high definition transmission codecs. An audio processor chip does the MQA decoding and rendering, while a third generation XMOS XU316 does the USB interfacing. Below this cooling profile, a piggyback circuit board holds the streaming engine. It runs on a quad-core ARM Cortex-A55 processor that works with 4GB DDR RAM and a 32GB eMMC system disk. And then we find the first obvious difference. Instead of the two AccuSilicon femtosecond clock oscillators, we find simpler crystals. The analog section is on the circuit board that also holds the digital section but is galvanically separated. This is the circuitry around the two ES9038 Q2M DAC chips, one per channel. The balanced outputs are kept balanced using op-amps that look different from the ones in the Master Edition and that corresponds with the information from EverSolo. The balanced signal is sent to the XLR directly and via another op-amp to the single-ended outputs. I also found differently looking voltage regulators, but again the labeling was so little and vague that I couldn't identify them. But I presume they are cheaper ones. I was pleasantly surprised to find WEMA capacitors, the red ones, in the standard version as well. These have a good reputation for audio applications. Since some people only trust measurements rather than their ears, let's look at some measurements. Both versions output slightly over 5 volts on the balanced outputs and, of course, 2.5 volts on the single-ended analog outputs. That's almost 2 dBs above the Red Book specs and will in generally work great with modern amplifiers. I have measured both versions and combined the outputs in one graph per measurement. The total harmonic distortion plus noise measurement shows that both versions measure identical. Odd harmonics are dominant but are 120 dB down, so not much of a problem. Linearity, a measurement that shows how precise digital levels are converted to analog levels, show again identical behavior. And it's very good behavior. Only below 140 dBFS the deviation exceeds 1 dB, something only a few years could not be obtained in far more expensive DACs. The fast tests uses many test tones at the same time and measures the noise and distortion in between those tones. Above 500 Hz the distortion of the standard version is 5 dB to 6 dB higher. Measurements below 200 Hz show unreliable measurements. Over several measurements it did average out equally between both versions. Then intermodulation distortion. Here two tones are fed into the device on the test. It is a measurement that is perhaps the one that proves audible differences. Let's do the CCIF measurement that uses tones of 13.5 kHz and 0.99996 kHz. Here we see that the standard version has a higher reading, increasing to 6 dB at minus 60 dB. The slope to the left is logical since the signal gets weaker. This graph is easier to understand since now the distortion is plotted versus the signal amplitude. Again, the standard version has slightly higher, or should I say slightly less low distortion, for it's still below 120 dB. In general, can be said that both versions measure very well and that the difference between the two are rather small. The EverSolo runs on the modified version of Android 11, the operating system normally used for smartphones and tablets. What's seen on the touchscreen on the front is a skin running on a basic version of Android. Along the top row it shows a status bar. Here input-output connections, network status, storage device, volume and currently playing song are shown. The icons in the center of the screen show several functions, while on the right transport buttons, a home button and a return button are situated. Along the right side of the screen we see the volume slider. The music player lets you select music. You can browse on tracks, artists, albums, genres and go to playlists. Let's go for artists. If you want, you can go for list view for faster scrolling. Searching for the artist is even faster. Let's do Pink Floyd. As you can see, the keyboard doesn't disappear after search. You have to tap the return key right of it to get it off the screen. Let's select the wall and you can see it's a 96 kHz 24-bit FLAC file. If you like, you can select the on-screen metering here. Back to the review. The music you have seen up till now was on an internal M.2 SSD drive, a 2TB Samsung 980 Pro PCI 4, for which I paid €129. M.2 SSDs are available up to 4TB and cost around €200, both including 21% VAT. Don't pay more for the fastest one. The slowest one is already fast enough. But you could alternatively plug in a USB drive. Let's go back to the main menu. The streaming menu gives access to the streaming services. Tidal, Qobuz and Hi-Res Audio show up first, but others show up when scrolling down, including apps for internet radio. Further down we see music cloud drivers and at the bottom instructions on how to connect to several services. Files let you access storage on the EverSolo, external storage and network storage. Let's see how to access music on my Synology server. It's simply tapping on SMB since I use the Samba protocol. Tap the Syn8 to select the NAS, then the music volume and select music to play. In the DSD folder I select 10cc, select the album and tap on I'm Not in Love. It starts playing right away while showing the file details. Source is used to select input and output. Along the top row the inputs, below it the outputs. Remarkable is that only one output can be used at the same time, with the exception of the analog outputs that can be used simultaneously. Not really a problem, but worth noting. Apps open a menu where you can add, delete or reset apps. For instance, if you don't use Apple Music, you can easily remove it by holding it instead of tapping. If you tap, you open the app. The settings menu, in the option Audio XLR RCA output, you can choose from 7 different reconstruction filters. The differences in sound quality are minute, although on the scope they look drastically different. For the listening test I chose slow roll-off linear, but more for a theoretical argument or short ringing than for sound reasons. Pun intended. In the same menu you can also set the startup volume for when you have a power amp or active speakers connected. Also the volume steps can be set between 0.5 to 3 dB. I skip the display and network menus for they are obvious. In general you can set a language and the options are vast. There are even multiple English versions like Canadian, Australian, Indian, US, XC, whatever that may be, and English. Many other world languages are present, even Dutch, Nederlands in Dutch. The other settings are self-explanatory. For reasons I don't understand, you can leave this user interface, or skin if you like, and use a simpler one, as seen here. It gives the same options in every menu, for as far as I can see. This option is not available in the user interface on the touchscreen. Cast brings you back to the normal user interface. The EverSolo support all current file formats up to PCM 768 32-bit, MQA 768 and DSD 256 as a streamer and over USB. Toslink and SPDIF are by standard limited to 192 kHz 24-bit. Over the network it supports DLNA, SMB, NSF and is run ready. Apps are available for Android and iOS. Both EverSolos were first listened to in my setup 2A, where they were connected to my network over the Upton Audio Ether Regen switch with Upton Audio UltraCaps 1.2 power supply. From there a fiber connection to Netgear ProSafe GS418 TPP switch on the third floor. See About my reference setup May 2023 for more information. The links at the usual places. The analog outputs were connected to the Marantz PMKI per light amplifier over Siltec London RCA cables. It drives the Acoustic Energy Radiance 1 loudspeakers connected over Kimber 4PR loudspeaker cable and supported by the REL-T5 subwoofer that was connected to the loudspeaker terminals on the Marantz using the cable that came with the sub. An iPad Pro running the EverSolo and Roon apps was used to control the EverSolo. The equipment was housed in a target rack. Let me start by saying that the standard version has a sound quality that is better than many people now have or need. It is a real gem. There is a fair chance that the stereo image is wider and deeper than can be heard over the stereo equal to my setup 2B. Resolution is comparable to streamers that cost a bit more and is equal in lows, mids and highs. Like the Master Edition, the sound character is towards the bright side, without being harsh. When we turn to the Master Edition, the mid-range is more open, the lows have more texture and the sibilance is even better controlled. Used analog out, the standard version positions itself in my reference setup 2A halfway up where the Master Edition is in the top of my setup 2, only a nose length from my setup 1B quality. Since many use or want to use the EverSolo as a streamer with external DAC, I have tested that too. But using an external DAC only is useful if a clearly better DAC is used. Therefore both EverSolos were then listened to in my setup 2 with an external DAC. Again it was connected to my network over the Upton Audio Ether Regen switch with Upton Audio UltraCaps 1.2 power supply. From there a fiber connection to the Netgear ProSafe GS418 TPP switch on the third floor. The SPDIF output was connected to the Mytek Brooklyn DAC that was powered by the Ferrum Hipsters power supply. The analog outputs of the Mytek were connected to the Marantz PMKI per light amplifier over Siltec London RCA cables. It drives the Acoustic Energy Radiance 1 loudspeakers connected over Kimber 4PR cable and supported by the REL-T5 subwoofer that is connected to the loudspeaker terminals on the Marantz using the cable that came with the sub. An iPad Pro running EverSolo and Roon apps was used to control the EverSolo. The equipment was housed in a target rack. Here the Master Edition had clearly my preference over the standard version. It sounds more at ease, more involving. Resolution was better over the entire spectrum. Pace and rhythm was more convincing. Sibilance was better too. Having said that, I have heard streamers used on external DACs that sound less than the standard version. When using the standard version as streamer with external DAC, it scales in halfway setup 2A. The Master Edition ends in the low regions of my setup 1B. A viewer pointed out that the EverSolos can also rip CDs when a USB optical drive is connected. Although some optical drives gave problems, it worked fine with me. Metadata was also collected correctly. Both players have a fantastic user interface, a great touchscreen and a good app that mirrors the touchscreen. And it sounds better than the price would suggest. This is a product that makes digital audio make a step forward. Where does that leave the Master Edition? Well, for a large group of people the standard version will suffice. But for the serious audiophile, the Master Edition might give more future expansion. not only when used with an external DAC, but also if a better amp and or speakers are bought. I have decided on the Master Edition for my Setup 2A. And on that bombshell I'll end this video. As usual, there will be a new video next Friday at 5 PM Central European Time. If you don't want to miss that, subscribe to my channel or follow me on the social media so you will be informed when new videos are out. Help me reach even more people by giving this video a thumb up or link to this video on the social media. It is much appreciated. Many thanks to those viewers that support this channel financially. It keeps me independent and lets me improve the channel further. If that makes you feel like supporting my work too, the links are in the comments below this video on YouTube. I'm Hans Beekhuizen, thank you for watching and see you in the next show or on the hbproject.com. And whatever you do, enjoy the music.